hola a todos, soy Javier Poveda, no me he peinado, no me he afectado, me da igual porque esto es de Bien TV, el canal donde te lo vas a pasar de bien, mientras aprendes geografía, historia del arte y un poquito este año de economía y de empresariales. Este vídeo va dirigido a mis alumnos de cuarto de sección del CEIPSO, el Encinar de Torrelodones. In this video, we are going to start with the content of the UD3, the Restoration, Liberalism and Nationalism. It will be divided in 3 parts, and we're going to start with, of course, the first one, which has the same name, Restoration, Liberalism and Nationalism. We're going to follow the presentation you have already uploaded to the virtual classroom, so let's go there with some new brand special effects. Madre mía. So this is it, the Restoration, Liberalism and Nationalism, with this magnificent picture of Eugene Delacroix. And the first part is Restoration, Liberalism and Nationalism, and we're going to start with the Congress of Vienna, which is what you are looking at right now. So let's start with the Restoration. This was the return to a political system, or to the political system of the ancien regime that was imposed by the victorious European powers, which were Austria, Prussia, Russia and Great Britain, which were the ones who defeated Napoleon Bonaparte in definitely in 1815 after the Battle of Waterloo, if you recall correctly. So, with this objective in view, they met at what is called the Congress of Vienna. They met in the Austrian capital in the years 1814 and 1815, where they adopted a series of measures. First, the absolute monarchies were reinstated. That is why this period is called the Restoration, because it was the restoration of the old kings that were deposed by Napoleon. So the European monarchs who had been deposed by Napoleon, they returned to their thrones. For example, Louis XVIII a Bourbon in the throne of France, or Fernando VII in the throne of Spain. The Europe's borders were changed. We will see that in the next slides with maps. And finally, these European powers agreed to support any monarch who was threatened by any revolutionary attempt to limit his or her power. And we will see that when we talk about Spain at the end of this unit. So during the Restoration, there were 3 and not 2 as the book says, 3 European alliances that were formed to enforce these agreements that were made at the Congress of Vienna. And their purpose was to assist any absolute monarch who was threatened by any kind of revolution. So they didn't want wanted again another French Revolution in any other country of Europe. These alliances were the following. The most important, the Holy Alliance, la Santa Alianza, which included Russia, Austria and Prussia, these pink countries in the first map. Then, the same year, the United Kingdom joined this Holy Alliance, so it became the quadruple alliance. Here you have it in green, okay, in this map on your right. And finally, 3 years later, in 1818, France herself joined this alliance, and it became the quintuple alliance. Okay, and here we have the map. Now let's see which were these important European border changes. First, Russia was given Finland, here in the north, part of the Ottoman Empire, the Bessarabia, which today is the Republic of Moldavia, and part of Poland, okay, most of what is today's Poland. Well, not today's Poland, but what was the Poland of that day, because today's Poland is a result of the World War II, and I am getting away of the point I want to make. So these 3 territories. Then Austria was given this part of Italy and the Dalmatian coast, okay, the Kingdom of Lombardy Venetia, Venetia, I don't know how to say that. So all of this part, the north of Italy and the Dalmatian coast, which today is part of Croatia and Bosnia, and the Tyrol, which is this part here, which today is part of Austria and Italy. Okay? This was in exchange, I was forgetting it, of the loss of the Austrian Low Countries here. Prussia was given the Rhineland, this portion of German territory here next to the Rhine River, part of Poland here, the other part of Poland, and part of Saxony, this territory over here. The United Kingdom was given the control of the Mediterranean Sea through a series of strategic positions, naval bases. They include Malta, here the Ionian Islands, las Islas Jónicas, and some other territories, for example here Heligoland, which is an island which is next to the coast of northern Germany. The Austrian Netherlands and the United Provinces, which today is known as Holland, were united to form the Kingdom of the Netherlands. It didn't last for a long time, but it was formed in the Congress of Vienna, the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. In Germany, the German Confederation was formed from 39 German states. This was a confederation that was dominated by Austria, here, the Austrian Empire, and the Prussians, okay? And the parliament of this confederation was located in the Austrian Empire. This will be important when we talk about the German unification. France was reduced in size to its 1791 borders, so prior to the wars of the coalition wars that were caused by the French Revolution. The Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia, el Reino de Cerdeña-Piamonte, was given Savoy and Nice, okay, which were part of the previous French Kingdom or French Empire. And this kingdom will be important because it's the basis of the Italian unification. We will talk about this in the second part of this unit. So this is the map of Europe in 1812, in the highest point of the largest extent of the Napoleonic Kingdom. I think I showed you this map in the previous presentation, yes. And this is the map of Europe after the Congress of Vienna, okay, in 1815. Very different, as you can see. And now we will talk about the European bourgeois revolutions of the 19th century. And they took place because many people refused to accept the restoration and the return of the ancien regime. Remember the consequences of the Napoleonic Empire. Many people in Europe got in touch with these new ideas that the French brought to them, such as a constitutional monarchy, the equality and liberty, or the rights that were guaranteed by the constitutions. So this was the main cause of these revolutions, and they were based on two ideologies, which were liberalism and nationalism, as well as on the idea of democracy. So let's see each one of them. First, liberalism. This is an ideology that revives today, and it advocates individual liberties, such as the right to life, the freedom of expression or speech and association, or the right to choose political representatives, or the right to own private property. This ideology is based on this political liberalism is based on the economic liberalism, which was developed in the 18th century by this man over here, well, and some more, but the most important was Adam Smith. Okay, so from a social point of view, liberalism represented the interests of the bourgeoisie, in particular the wealthy bourgeoisie, so the upper class of the upper part, or the most important part of the bourgeoisie, the bankers and large property owners. What were its key principles? The constitutions that guaranteed citizens' rights and liberties, the constitutional monarchy as a form of government, the separation of powers, the executive power held by the monarch and the government, both, the legislative power held by the parliament or the Cortes, and the judicial power held by the courts. The popular sovereignty through limited male suffrage based on property ownership. This is very important. They supported that only the people who were proprietaries could vote. Okay, and finally, individual liberties. We have talked about them: freedom of association, expression, freedom of press, freedom of religion, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Nationalism. This ideology, also prevails today, it advocates the right of the people who define themselves as a nation to form independent states. Remember that map of Europe, we have very large empires. So this ideology was triumphant in many places because many people that named themselves or considered themselves as a nation to achieve their independence. So the key principle of this nationalist was the formation of nation states, Estados-nación, based on a population with common links, for example, the same culture, the same history, and mostly the same language. But we have two types of nationalism here in the 19th century. We have Unification nationalism and Separatist nationalism, also called in Spanish nacionalismo centrífugo y nacionalismo centrípeto. So, the Unification nationalism advocated the unification of independent states with a common language and history. For example, the various states of Italy and Germany. And on the other hand, we have Separatist nationalism, which advocated independence for regions that form part of multinational states, such as the Greeks, the Serbians, Bulgarians in the Ottoman Empire, but also the Polish from the Russian Empire, or part of the German states in the Austrian Empire, or what later will be the Yugoslavia from the Austrian Empire, and so on. Okay, and this picture is the massacre at Chios during the Greek Independence War. Finally, the democracy. These democratic movements of the 19th century advocated ordinary people's right to participate in politics. Remember that liberalism only allowed the wealthy bourgeoisie to participate in politics. So their supporters wanted to end the social and economic inequalities produced by this bourgeois liberalism. So the petite bourgeoisie, the laborers and the peasants, they were the supporters of this democracy, of this ideology. They rejected the limited male suffrage imposed by the wealthy bourgeoisie, by the liberals. As these groups did not have much or any property, they did not have the right to vote. And their great principles were the following: the universal manhood suffrage. They thought all men should have, all men, not all people, all men, not the women, should have the right to vote, and they preferred a republic as the form of government. Why? Because they considered that hereditary monarchy to be incompatible with democracy. Okay? If you remember from the last unit, there is some parallelism between these liberals and these Democrats in the Girondins and the Jacobins from the French Revolution. And that's it. This is the death of Lord Byron, which was an English poet and was a fighter for the freedom of the Greeks against the Ottoman Empire. Madre mía, los efectos especiales, el presupuesto. Hasta aquí la unidad de hoy. Muchas gracias por ver el vídeo, espero que os haya gustado y que hayáis aprendido algo. Me despido con esta frase maravillosa, a ver si la consigo... A ver si la consigo... Aquí, Dios mío, a ver si la consigo señalar. Le Congrès ne marche pas, il danse. El Congreso no anda, sino que baila. Es una referencia, esto es de una frase del príncipe de Ligny, o Ligny, no sé cómo se pronuncia, que era un diplomático belga. Aquel entonces no existía Bélgica, pero había nacido en los Países Bajos de los Habsburgo, que en lo que se refería, digamos, lo que se burlaba de el ambiente festivo, esa opulencia y pues eso, las óperas, las cazas y todo eso a lo que se dedicaban los vencedores de las guerras napoleónicas en el Congreso de Viena. No es la mejor frase que he traído, pero es la que he encontrado. Muchas gracias por ver el vídeo y nos vemos en el próximo.